A larger shipper, we sign up at the end of 2024. They had a $65 million transportation spend on small parcels specifically. So on small parcel shipping, $65 million annual spend. They worked with three carriers already. They owned their own facilities, so they weren't really dealing with like a 3PL controlling the spend. They had their own contracts they negotiated. They leveraged all their volume to get the best pricing. When we did our analysis and ultimately signed them up and implemented our contract, we saved them $8 million off of the $65 million.
Welcome to Blue Ocean by StartOps. Each episode, I sit down with leaders in consumer brand supply chain, finance, and CX to talk about the problems they're facing and the solutions they're using or building. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey everyone, I'm Charles Cushing, founder of StartOps. With me here today is Jordan Zapotechne, co-founder and chief revenue officer of Enterprise Purchasing Group. Welcome, Jordan.
Hey, thanks for having me, Charles.
Just to lead us off, can you just give me the quick one-liner on what is EPG? What do you guys do?
From a 10,000 foot view, EPG is pretty simple. We're a group, some people call us a co-op, but a group of members that is combined and joined to leverage the purchasing volume of all of our members to obtain preferential pricing and savings to help big and small companies reduce operational costs.
And you guys are pretty much mostly focused on transportation. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's one thing that's a little bit different between us and maybe other group purchasing organizations is that generally group purchasing organizations are broad, very broad, and they do a lot of cost categories. We are almost solely focused on transportation and logistics.
I think that's actually a perfect segue because unlike many other entity types in the space, I think GPOs are maybe not as broadly well understood. And I've got my own sort of curious questions that I've been dying to ask you. So before we get into EPG specifically, why don't we just start with the space? Can you just talk a little bit more about like what is a GPO? Like how did this industry or this like structure get started and like what are the sort of typical characteristics and what defines what a GPO is?
GPOs, group purchasing organizations, they've been around for forever. And where they got their initial start was in kind of two major sectors. In the healthcare industry, because if you think about the supply chain in healthcare, there's these, huge medical device and equipment and supply manufacturers. And then obviously there's these different hospital institutions all over the world that are purchasing those. And so what they found, decades and decades ago was that by combining the resources at these different institutions that previously didn't purchase together, they were going to get a better price from the manufacturers, but also there was some efficiencies in supply chain. There was consolidation of orders, but I think almost more than anything, it was leveraging the buying power to get better prices. And that ended up being a really beneficial aspect of the healthcare industry was that these hospitals were able to lower costs, which ultimately the goal was to pass that savings on to patients too, because your costs are less for the basic supplies and equipment that you would purchase. The other sector that GPOs were originally started in, it was the nonprofit. So if you picture government agencies and people who are purchasing millions and millions of reams of paper for school districts or for government offices, combining that buying power was helping these nonprofit organizations reduce costs because their goal is not to reduce costs and make more money. It's to reduce costs and survive. And so the GPOs gave these organizations buying power, supply chain expertise that maybe they didn't have before, and just better resources.
You are representing a group of shippers, right? Your members. Presumably, if someone comes through you, they're going to get a better rate than if they went straight to the carrier. But, are you effectively competing with the carrier's own sales team in getting these deals? Like, how do they think about that from their perspective?
I think initially that was the perspective of the carrier was that if we work with a GPO like EPG, they are part customer, part partner, and part competitor. There's kind of a lot that can go into that. That can create what many carriers might call it channel conflict. But essentially, the value that we were able to distinguish for the carriers is that they know who their top 500 prospects are or their top 200 clients. They know who those are. And that's probably not the fit for a group purchasing organization like us. But when you're talking about tens of thousands of businesses, many of them mid-market, many of them not on the radar of the carrier, you would think a big carrier like UPS has the reach to reach every single company, do it effectively, do it well, and close business. But in reality, that's not the case. And to create value for the shipper outside of just shipping rates, which is what we do, adds a layer of value for the carrier as well, because they're working with someone like EPG who brings a bunch of business. I don't want to say quick to convert, but it's quicker to convert than if they're using their own sales team because we have our membership that is loyal to us. And then also EPG is doing a lot of other things on the side, like the analytics and the supply chain consulting, things that UPS, if they had to use their own resources to do that, would be extremely costly. So we're adding kind of this layer of value for the shipper that only adds credibility to the carriers that we represent too. For them, I think it does improve the economies of scale to go to market.
Maybe you could take us back to the very beginning and just talk about like how did the first idea for this start to coalesce and like what did the earliest chapters of the company's life look like?
The idea of EPG and, what it could be and what I think it should be was something that I had in my mind 15 years ago. I worked in logistics for about that long, and very early on, I came across organizations that were not GPOs, but they were GPO adjacent. They operated somewhat similarly to what a GPO does, and I saw the things that they did well and I saw the things that they did not so well.
What were you doing at the time?
I was working for a logistics company. So I was working in LTL and truckload, but I represented a very large group of industries that were part of trade associations. So these trade associations ultimately have tens of thousands of members that come to the trade associations for resources, support. It could be all different kinds of things, but transportation could be one of those. And so as I went after these groups and you want to help these companies, I was shackled in the certain things that I could do for them. And I also saw where with the right program, you could reach tens of thousands of companies in a really effective way and provide meaningful change for them from a cost perspective, while also being a really good partner to the carrier. And 15 years ago, that wasn't possible for me. I wasn't in a place for that to be something that could develop and to have that network. And so the idea was in the back of my mind. You go on in your life and you keep working in logistics. And so I've held different roles since that time where most recently, prior to EPG, I was an industry consultant helping very large shippers negotiate their carrier contracts. My background came from parcel and the consulting space and contract negotiation. And then our other founders kind of come from a really cool sweet spot of other parcel industry verticals. Our president, his name is John Babakwa. He comes from 3PL fulfillment and he's spent 35 years leading some of the best 3PLs in the country. And then our other two founders come from the shipping technology space. So both came from Easy Post. One was head of partnerships, and the other was part of a patent pending technology. It has to do with shipping rating technology. He brings the knowledge that none of us had in terms of analyzing data in mass amounts, building systems that can automate that and streamline it and create what were the back end tools for us to be able to be experts for our members. And so it was kind of a coming together of all the right pieces to create something that was going to be beneficial for our members.
How did the gang get together?
I met some of the other co-founders through business opportunities and networking. And then they said, "Hey, I think you should meet this gentleman over here. He seems like he's like-minded." And so I ended up getting on a few phone calls. And an hour into us all being on the phone, we said, there's something here because the idea is too strong. The resources are there. This is the right opportunity to do that.
It's day zero. How did you all sort of decide to make the leap? And then like, you don't have any volume, you don't have any contracts. How do you actually take the first step on this journey?
Yeah, we were at our own jobs until the idea was real enough. At the time, we all had to take the leap and say, we want this to be a real thing. When it's a real thing, we have to commit 100%. So at the time, we all took the leap. For us, it was just before the pandemic happened. But going live from zero shipping volume to hundreds of millions of dollars in shipping volume, how do you start that? And I think the biggest part of being a GPO is the membership. The membership is where we get our strength, it's where we get our community, it's where we get our buying power, it's where we get information, market intelligence. It all comes from membership. So there's nothing more important than the members that we have. And so we knew really early on we had to start there. And building members that didn't have access to a contract with us. We didn't have contracts yet. You had to get members first. Through our different industry connections, we worked with some groups. We had some good PE firms with strong connections that we could leverage and say, hey, hypothetically, we're preparing something here that we think is going to be a big thing. Are you bought into this if and when it's ready? And luckily, we had helped these companies in the past and we had built trust. And they said, without hesitation, let us know when you're ready and we're ready. And so with that buy-in, that initial commitment, you can then go to the carriers and say, look, we represent these companies. We're going to be adding these companies. This is what we're going to be doing. We'd love for you to be a part of it. We'd love to partner with you. It's a lot of storytelling of what is capable and what can be done, which I enjoy. I enjoy the storytelling part of it.
How long did that whole process take, sort of circling the wagons around who is gonna be your initial members, getting them to sort of take the leap, as it were, and then what was the first carrier you approached, and how did that go down?
It took probably 6 months to get enough commitment from our network to say, this is a big enough group and this is enough spend and transportation that we've got something here. We can get a very good contract just with this. So I think it took about 6 months. And it was probably 3 or 4 PE firms with their portfolio comes out to be a couple dozen companies with pretty high volume shipping. We knew right off the bat we were going to start with one very strong carrier because of the package characteristics that we had through our members. DHL e-commerce was a very good fit. We formed a partnership with them early 2019 and had a really good partnership with them for lightweight shipping. And then from there, we also knew you need a national carrier. We need a carrier that's going to handle 1 to 150 pounds everywhere in the country and do it reliably, and equally important, be a name that people trust. And so UPS was a very logical and kind of, immediate thought in our head. We trust them. We know that they have a strong network that can deliver packages. And having worked with them in the past on contract negotiations, I also had a really good understanding of their pricing structure. Working with them early on, I think it was education on both sides. We had to educate them about what we wanted to be as a GPO and what the opportunity could be for them. And they had to educate us on, what's their comfort level? Where do they see their strategy going forward? And how does EPG fit into that? Fortunately, it was a very good fit for both sides. We knew that we could help them and they knew they could help us.
Whose door at UPS do you go knocking on when you wanna, sort of negotiate a new GPO master agreement? At what level are these conversations having, and what did it feel like to sort of be in the room talking to the representatives of such a massive organization?
When you talk to UPS, and especially if you visit them as a company, they make you feel like you are meant to be there. You feel welcome. There's a little bit of a family environment there, which I think is ingrained in their philosophy for as long as they've been around, is that there's a kind of a community feeling there. You have to meet with executives. You can't meet with a local UPS rep and say, I've got an idea. This is my idea. You're talking to people who lead the verticals within UPS that would be touching private equity or group purchasing or leverage spend. There's these groups that, are dedicated to managing that at a corporate level, both strategically from a pricing standpoint and also kind of a market segmentation standpoint. They've got a really good pulse on what they want and where it fits. And so we met with those teams. There's multiple teams at their headquarters in Atlanta, and being there, it's exciting because, I value their partnership. I value their own, as a publicly traded, very large company. It's not intimidating, but it is exciting to be there with these groups that clearly touch a very large part of the total GDP. They impact as much as like 6% of GDP is coming through the transportation that UPS manages. So
What in your mind have been the kind of major milestones or mile markers in the company's growth?
there's different measuring sticks that you want to hit as a GPO. One is in membership count. So you want to be able to serve as many companies as possible because we are only as strong as our members. So the more members, the more leverage, the more community that we have together to be able to strive towards a common goal. So very early on, when I talk about month 1, month 6, hitting 100 members was nice. Hitting 1,000 members was great. Hitting 10,000 members was extremely exciting. So I think we get to a point of where you're representing tens of thousands of businesses. You take a step back and you realize this is a very big thing. This isn't just a few companies coming together and networking. This is something that I think is driving many, many companies and many industries in kind of the same direction and for the same goal. So membership count was huge. And then when it came to transportation spend, that's another big one. As a GPO for us, you can have a lot of members, but if the members aren't shipping, you don't really have a lot of leverage with the carriers. And so getting our contracts to a point where across all modes of transportation, you're doing $100 million in spend was very big. And that was a huge milestone for us. And then getting to hundreds of millions of dollars in spend is where, same as the membership, you kind of take a step back and you say, we're managing a very large amount of transportation spend. And that was exciting. Those things are the main drivers of success for us is take care of your members and grow that membership and the rest will fall into place.
Who is this for? And, are you competitive for like really big shippers? Maybe put some numbers on it if you can. Like, how did the sort of savings expectations change depending on kind of where you are in the stack?
Yeah, I'll use an example of a larger shipper, and I'll use an example of like what's a very typical shipper too. So, a larger shipper, we sign up at the end of 2024. They had a $65 million transportation spend on small parcels specifically. So, on small parcel shipping, $65 million annual spend. They worked with three carriers already. They owned their own facilities, so they weren't really dealing with like a 3PL controlling the spend. They had their own contracts they negotiated. They leveraged all their volume to get the best pricing. When we did our analysis and ultimately signed them up and implemented our contract, we saved them $8 million off of the $65 million. So an immediate large impact to their bottom line spend. And what it ultimately let them do as well, because they were a fast growing company, is it led them as they were pursuing acquisitions of other companies to go out and say, if we buy this company, which they did, they ultimately doubled their transportation spend through acquisition. They were able to immediately, with our help, forecast what the savings would be on the new book of business that they just bought. And so they acquired a company that also did about 65 million, and they knew they were going to save about 12 million off of that 65. So if you look at $130 million transportation spend and you're saving roughly 20, $21 million off of it, it was needle moving for them, even as a really big organization. And it wasn't because they didn't have experts. They had experts in hand. And what really ended up being the best solution for them was the collaboration between their in house team, which are experts at what they do, and the EPG team, which are experts in strictly procurement. We don't have to worry about all the ins and outs that those other experts have to handle on those teams. We come in and we focus solely on where is the market today? How do your package characteristics kind of match and fall into the market today? And what are the best possible contracts that you can acquire for that volume? It was the best scenario for them that their internal team looked like heroes. And not because of us, but just in tandem with us. You work together and you have that collaboration. It worked for everybody and it led them on their growth to be able to acquire more companies and immediately create new value in the companies that they bought. So that's a good example of a big shipper. And then from like say like an average size shipper, like a 10 million, $20 million shipper, many of those, especially if they're fast growing companies, have been with the same carrier for 4 or 5 years. It's enabled them to grow. It's been predictable. They've done maybe multiple negotiations, but they've been with that carrier and it makes perfect sense. And ultimately, what you find when you're working with a single or even two carriers as you grow is that one single carrier can do a lot of things really, really well. And there might be certain parts of your business, especially if you have new products or new SKUs that maybe are a little bit different than your other products. The pricing you have in place doesn't match those new products. It's not catered to the characteristics of these new package sizes or weights that you're using. And so when your package characteristics look different or your volume balloons and it's higher than it was 18 months ago, you're no longer in a good fit for where you were with that contract. And so where we come in for those fast growing, good size shippers, but still early, we come in with those guys and we show them not only how you can optimize through a carrier diverse network, but also get the most out of that existing provider that you're already working with. And ultimately, make them better shippers and more profitable.
What I keep hearing sort of echoing through this conversation is you guys have this like really cool, strong analytics capability. And then you also have the contracts. The combination of those two things allows you kind of not just to go and whatever bash shippers over the head with low rates, but it's like it's a holistic process and you kind of put together the package of different transportation options that's right for them. I want to make the visual really clear. Talk about like, okay, it's day one. I'm interested in EPG and figuring out what we could do with them. What does your process look like? Maybe through to that initial conversation, through like onboarding.
Our goal is to make that process from, hey, I've had a great conversation. I'm interested. I want to learn more to realizing savings. That's kind of our secret sauce, I think, is taking over the years that process, which in some organizations, it can be 6, 12 months between realizing or identifying an opportunity and then actually measuring savings on it. So for us, the goal was to shorten that. And so from a very, simple perspective, it starts with we sign a non-disclosure agreement so that we can share the details of our contracts with you, be able to show you the value of what we've negotiated, and also allow our members to share the data with us to do that robust analysis that you talked about. So through the analysis after an NDA, The analysis allows us to, within 48 to 72 hours, come back and have evaluated the entire data sample, re-rate it with the contracts that are at your disposal through EPG, and understand cost savings from a rate perspective. So this is like step one is just if you change no operations at all, your location's the same, your package characteristics are the same. What happens if you implement better contracts? We get that back within about 72 hours and we schedule a call to talk through that. We want to educate them on what we found, what they're doing great, what we see as an opportunity. And then ultimately at that point, the next step is determined on the comfort level or the interest of the company. If they say, this looks great, this is going to allow us to scale and save money and ship better. And we're at a point in our life cycle that I think we're ready to maybe make a carrier switch and do something that's going to help push us forward. If that's the case, implementation takes about 10 business days. Very, very quick. You sign the member agreements to gain access to the contracts. You sign a carrier agreement directly with the carrier because one of the most important parts of our program is that we want our members to work directly with these world-class carriers, have their own account numbers, have their own visibility to the billing data with the carrier directly, and pay the carrier directly. So you sign those agreements and you immediately start implementation with the carrier. They're creating your account numbers, they're getting your locations prepared and ready for daily pickup if needed, and scheduling what they call a kickoff call to let you meet your new support team at that carrier and really go through what it's like to work with that carrier. That's all done within about 10 days. And within that period of time, you're given a go live date of your discounts with the account number. On that date, officially, you can plug your account number into any shipping system that you normally use and work with, or give it to your 3PL if your 3PL is going to ship on your account. And you're realizing savings immediately within that time period. And then to your point, shortly after, the additional value is as soon as your account number is created, you're live. We're going to connect that account to Savvy, which is our in house analytics portal. Savvy is kind of the all encompassing truth of your data. It ingests the carrier billing data, it audits it for accuracy and for validity of charges, but it also puts these thousands of lines from different carriers into one normalized BI tool that's giving you hundreds of reports and customizable dashboards to give you the visibility into what you're actually doing. And that's, I think, one of the most important parts of measuring the continuous improvement and measuring the actual savings that you're realizing pre and post implementation with EPG. It in itself is something pretty special, but we don't treat it like anything other than a tool. We don't want to sell Savvy. We want Savvy to be a resource that our members ultimately get and leverage and use as something that helps them be smarter shippers.
And can you plug in, say there's whatever, some carrier that you didn't end up using EPG's contracts. Are you able to pull data in to Savvy from that too? So you have a holistic picture of your overall spend?
Yeah, a good example of that is even if a member comes to EPG and let's say they sign up for one of our carrier contracts, that carrier contract might make up 50% of their spend. The other 50 might stay with the carrier they're already using, but you still want to see the data all in one place. And so Savvy as a portal is carrier agnostic. You can connect as many carriers as you want. It can be your own account numbers, it can be account numbers that are through your EPG contracts, but it can all be housed there. And it gives you the opportunity to, as I mentioned, normalize data across carriers all in one place, irregardless of where that contract is coming from.
Maybe just one more kind of future looking question. I'll make it a two-parter. Part A is like, how big can this get? Like, at what point are you guys so big that, actually you're you're a significant amount of the volume going to a carrier, or like do the tectonic plates shift if you guys are out there as like one of the biggest buyers in the market?
We couldn't be too big to the carriers. And it comes down to the structure that we built with the carriers, which is important. But let's say we were a single entity with a single account number and we wanted to be the customer of the carrier and we just wanted to rebuild and be a reseller to our clients. That's very high risk for the carrier because if essentially one customer could go away overnight, all the business goes away. We're less of a good thing and more of a very high risk account that could go away. And so the structure that we built with the carriers to enable EPG members to all have their own account numbers, work directly with the carriers, build one-to-one relationships that over time become very deep. And our members traditionally, become very ingrained from a client perspective with the carrier on more than just shipping rates. There's other solutions that they ultimately want to adopt. So that ability to have one-to-one relationships for the carriers it facilitates something that's very natural for them. We're not as much this single entity as we're facilitating a lot of direct relationships with the customers that they want to serve and they want to be a resource for. So I don't think we become too big. And in other verticals, other industries, there's group purchasing spends that go up to the tens of billions of dollars in certain categories. That might be more healthcare, more like consumables and things like that. But from a transportation perspective, it can be replicated in the same way. More spend is not bad for the carrier, and more spend is better for our members. It's one of those things that we look forward. We have 100% growth goals for the next 5 years. We're going to continue to grow and grow. And that's backed up by member growth, because if you can see the members join in, you can see how they implement contracts. It's very predictable. And we're at that trajectory.
What are you most excited about, in terms of looking forward to the future? Is it just growth? Is it future partnerships or expansions? Is it, any sort of new capabilities? Like when you wake up in the middle of the night, you're thinking about like the future of the company. What's popping into your mind?
Future state, there's a couple different things. I think what we do from an analytics standpoint is really strong. I think there's probably even more development and more sophistication that we can implement to do more predictive forecasting, a lot more work to help companies look at not just what am I doing now and understanding what my cost perspective is now, but what does it look like if I ramp up marketing in this part of the country and start selling my product like crazy to a region I've never really shipped to or managed? What does it look like to my cost per package? Or where does my network need to be kind of located to be able to facilitate that growth? I think from an analytics perspective, we're only going to get better. So I'm really excited about that. And I think as you get more members and more data, it's anonymous and it's randomized data, the way that it gets analyzed. But to be able to do that and use millions of lines of data from tens of thousands of companies, it gives us the market intelligence to be a lot smarter and more targeted with the advice that we give. So I think that's a major growth for us. And then I think also we've already done a good job of it, but we're going to continue to improve on tying in these different contracts and solutions as an easier to access bundled solution. I use the example of making it very easy to use EPG for ocean, LTL and truckload and parcel without it being so segmented as three different programs, but maybe one unified, very succinct program, which to me, that's monumentous. And for a member, it only cuts out maybe 3 or 5 days of implementation time, but I think it's something that is going to make us that much better.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for sharing about this very interesting space and your very interesting company, and appreciate you joining us.
I appreciate you having me. It was great talking to you, Charles. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for listening. If you want to learn more about EPG, we'll be linking details in the show notes, including how to get in touch with them through StartOps.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Blue Ocean. Blue Ocean is produced by StartOps, a growing collection of resources for operations leaders at e-commerce brands. A few of the things we built include a growing, vendor-free Slack community for operators to ask their most important questions and get answers from trusted peers, a job board that curates jobs from 1,500 modern brands, a media hub that includes this podcast, as well as articles and templates on a variety of operations topics, and a comprehensive directory of the software and services used by our community members. If you want to learn more, head to startops.network. And to keep up with the latest information from StartOps, or catch the most recent episodes of Blue Ocean, follow the StartOps page on LinkedIn or subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks for listening, and hope to catch you next episode.